A quick run through. Recording. Welcome to a quick run through of Civi as the communications hub. So, as everyone, I hope will sort of have an indication of, Civi has a lot of different features, a lot of different functions, and can be used quite flexibly and using a few different areas for a quite powerful and complex sort of suite of communications. So there's a few areas that I want to run through and kind of give a overview and a bit of a demo of. We're starting with this kind of like the general landscape. As I said, there are a few different features, and quite one of the sort of best thing to start with is essentially the decision-making process. So there are often several ways to solve the same problem, but you can sort of navigate through deciding which tool suits the best situation. There's the standard traditional mailing tool that we'll cover, which I think will probably be the most familiar thing to most people here. But if you're new to Civi, then it's worth just reviewing what's in there. Then there's the Mosaico suite, which is, I think, the sort of more exciting and I guess much better sort of presented mailing tool, which comes integrated into Civi, at least within the CompuCo work we've done. And then we'll get into a bit more of the kind of automation side of it. So scheduled reminders is a toolkit, as is Civi Rules, and both of which can be used for adding some power and automation to the email functionality. And then lastly, a sort of quick rundown, as I mentioned at the start, of when to use what, because I think we can offer a bit of guidance on which tool fits which job best. So just looking at the mailing landscape, it's a bit simplified, but hopefully provides a guide in that Mosaico is a third-party but integrated mailing system into Civi. So essentially your first decision is always whether to use Mosaico or the standard mailing tool. And it's worth noting as well then the features that are connected to the standing mailing tool, like some of the more detailed templates, the Civi Rules and scheduled reminders, all of those refer back to the standard mailing tool rather than Mosaico. But we'll get into the details of what that is later. So starting with CiviMail, what's in the box? There is, I would say, a complete and fairly powerful mailing package just built into Civi. It gives you options to do the kind of like quick fire start with and build mailings right from the mailing menu, which is what's displayed on the left here with all the options. And then from there, you can also manage the settings that you're putting in across mailings, use different from addresses, which are useful for managing content from different teams and making it clear to people what the content and what the sort of context of mailings are. There's a whole suite of reporting and tracking that's built into the mailing tool that lets you track opens, bounces, and engagement. And then lastly, there is what I hope is fairly familiar. There's template management, which you'd expect in any mailing tools. And it also has built-in features to let you do things like run opt-outs and unsubscribes, and also do things like reply management. So you can configure the mail to have a built-in reply to address so that you can have a dedicated mailbox for that. That's a bit of I guess, a high-level tour of the standard mailing tool, but there's a lot of configurability built in, as you can see by just the sort of screen cap we have here of the menu on the left. Sorry, I'm just admitting a few more people to the room. So
I'll take care of that, Hamish, don't worry.
No worries. Yeah, so this is, I would say, the core of CiviMail, and the functionality here is completely ubiquitous to Civi, used by almost every client we've ever met, and it's just hugely reliable and powerful. Oh, sorry, I've skipped over a slide. So within this standard sort of mailing toolkit, I guess I wanted to highlight the sort of core steps and the core features. It relies quite heavily on the use of templates, lets you build stuff like attachments into large group mailings, lets you send mailings from Civi directly to either like sets of individuals or existing mailing list groups. And lastly, the powerful tool that I think is, I guess, used to the most effect by the clients that I work with is this HTML editing tool. So lots of clients will have HTML templates built for mailings, which they can just import wholesale into the mailing tool and then save as templates. And then once they are imported, they can be either edited in the code or in the in the editor window to let you control and add to the styling, or add things like tokens and specific images. So it's depending on like the style and complexity of the user. This can be a really powerful way of creating like really smart, really well formatted and like highly customized mail, all through the standard bundle mailing tool. So moving on to Mosaico. So Mosaico is, as I mentioned, it's the sort of alternate mailing tool, which is designed much more around the concept of having highly branded, really sort of beautiful and smart looking mail templates, and is used, I would say, much more by things like marketing teams and comms teams in the clients you work with. It has a sort of longer process to build a mailing and follows the steps that you can see at the top here, where you design the settings of the mailing. You do a design process around which can involve selecting from existing templates, and then eventually you can send and test as you would any normal mailing. The key bit of functionality that I will move on to on this slide is that the Mosaico mailing tool is all built around this block-driven drag and drop interface. It makes it super easy to pick from one of the existing blocks, drag it into your mail, and then configure within each of those to change titles, to add images, and to completely customize the content of your mailing to have, one, the content that you want, and two, a lot of the things like branding and color settings that you want. There is a whole toolkit that lets you change these settings at both like a global level, so changing all the fonts across the mailing, let's say, or a local level just to edit a particular block that you're working in to make it stand out or customized. It's also worth noting that there are a few extras built into the Mosaico tool. Like there is, for example, a stock images library that comes as standard, which can be really useful for building out the content in your mailing. Looping back to, I guess, where I started on the Mosaico toolkit, the other key sort of part of the process is that usually once you've created a particular mailing and worked on the formatting and the images and the content, these often feed back into being saved down as templates, and you end up with a large template library with a lot of content, a lot of like pre-styled and worked on content. That means that when you come to this process again in future, it's really easy to just generate a new mailing from one of your templates, which can come preloaded with the right content, the right branding, and often you're using things like tokens, a lot of the built-in customization as well to make the mails personal to everyone receiving them. So I think, probably the easiest way to kind of show what that looks like is a couple of examples. So these are, we've got two client examples of people who have of templates that they have running and are sending out to customers, and one of our own in the center there, which is a newsletter that we run. Or again, we manage a lot of our own processes in CompuCo out of Civi, and the Mosaico tool particularly has been really useful for us, helping to manage some of our client comms, as it means that we can put together really smartly branded newsletters and mailings, and do that with a sort of few clicks process based on the templates that we have made. So I think we have a lot of clients who make use of this really extensively and can put a lot of time and energy and complexity into the way that they brand and build out these mail templates in Mosaico. So moving away from Mosaico, I'll talk a little bit more now about some of the sort of automation side of the mail toolkit. And this is more around, building, I guess, all like automated processes and adding a sort of slightly smart element to the way that you manage emails in Civi. And this is great for building processes that essentially you can connect and then forget about, to let Civi take care of a lot of mail functionality for you. So the scheduled reminders tool is essentially a branch of the email tool that is all geared around a specific date attached to a record. So The key entities you want to, that you can link this to, are contacts, activities, memberships, events, and contributions. And I've highlighted events because I think it's one of the most common use cases, and it's one I'll show on the next slide or two. But essentially, wherever there is a date associated with a record, you have the option to put a scheduled reminder onto that date. So this can be anything from a contact's birthday, an activity's due date, the end date of a membership, or the sort of start date of an event. The scheduled reminders tool is connected into all of these areas, and therefore lets you set an email to trigger on a specified time date. So again, this can work sort of like proactively or retroactively. One of the other sort of I get maybe less obvious uses is that following events, you can send a thank you email or a follow-up email a week after the fact. So it doesn't always need to be a reminder so much as just a scheduled email, I suppose. So taking a quick look at what that looks like in system, this is just a quick screenshot of just what the configuration screen looks like in one of our standard test sites. And you can see that this is just like a really simple flow where the reminder is called meeting tomorrow. It's for an activity, which is a meeting. And the reminder is set to trigger 1 day before the activity date. So you can configure the rules really, really simply. And then lastly, what you can't see in the screen would be just choosing which template to use. So if you had a mail template made up, which said something like, there is a meeting tomorrow, you would attach that template, use the right tokens to make it personal to the recipient. And then once this scheduled reminder is set, it would trigger for all of the activities that you've sort of included in the rules there. And therefore you could leave that process running. And if you were setting meetings using Civi, or wanted to use that as a way of kind of like creating and scheduling activities for people, these reminders would keep flowing and keep being sent to people as and when the date comes up. So I've written up, I guess, a couple of use cases here, which I think are useful to kind of show the depth and breadth of what you can use reminders for. So I mentioned events before as one of the like really common use cases. But 2 weeks before an event, you email all the participants reminding them to book accommodation. Or a week after a pitch meeting, you could have a reminder set to send an email to all the attendees with a specific template. The reminders system can be used in like several different use cases, all the way through to perhaps the slightly sillier version at the end here, which is sending people birthday emails on their birthday. I know that I love getting birthday emails, so I think why not set it up, as it's always a huge joy for people in your contacts book. Cool. So I think what we have here is just a quick GIF of essentially setting up a scheduled reminder process. This is done from within the events area. So one of the key things to remember is that within the events area is a tab built in to take you to the scheduled reminders tool, which is one other way to access it other than through the administer and like the administer section, which was highlighted on the previous slide. So in case anyone didn't see that, this is the sort of menu structure to get to that scheduled reminders section, and that will bring you to this. So lastly, I want to talk about Civi Rules, and this is arguably the most complex but also most powerful way of configuring emails in Civi. The standard set of steps you need to make a rule in Civi is a trigger, a condition, and an action, although you don't always necessarily need conditions, but it depends on the circumstance. It's got a lot of options and a lot of functionality, but essentially it does boil down to looking for something in Civi to act as your trigger, and then your action can be any number of like actions to be taken in Civi, although the definite most common one that we see clients using is the send an email function to give you essentially either customized emails to contacts to communicate with them or alert them, or often the same thing but with internal emails. So we see lots of people setting up triggers for things like case flows or activity flows to give an email to someone to alert them that something's happened. So it's In terms of mailing, this is often, I think, on the more like technical end, and is therefore used much more like as part of existing processes. But as you can see here, I've listed a few examples of each, but by no means is this list exhaustive. If you get the chance to go into the Civi Rules area, you'll see that there are a ton of options that you can add in for each of these. You can have loads of different triggers, loads of different actions that you can take. I've tried to sort of stick to, I guess, a few of the most common and most useful ones, but it does mean that you can have the option to really monitor different parts of your Civi system for events that you're interested in. So I mentioned activities here, but payments being made is a really big one. Getting an alert when payments come in. You can have daily triggers to check on whether something is still in place or not, or daily reminders if there is something outstanding that you want to keep generating reminders for. You can have you can connect it to the case flow process. So those of you who are in the cases room with me will hopefully recognize this and see that when you have a case flow process and someone reaches, I don't know, the end of their cases or has a new application, you can have rules built in to trigger off of that. Or even as simple as people changing the information on their contact records. So it can get a little bit complex, but I have seen clients do something as specific as if someone changes their phone number, send me an email so that I know. All of these different areas to kind of listen for in the system are options in the Civi Rules area. The conditions area I will talk about less, but suffice to say, it is just a way of narrowing down your rule to only look at what you wanted to look at. If you can, without you telling it what to do, the system is quite sort of, I guess, strict in its like the way that you put these rules together. So, for example, if I wanted, a payment as my trigger, I'd have to specify what kind of payment in my conditions area. And then lastly, I've mentioned already, having an action that can come off the back of it. Sending email is obviously the key one, and within that email, you can specify what kind of template you want to use, and that's what refers back to that templates area that I mentioned in the core Civi tool. But you can also do all sorts of more like detailed and powerful actions. You can delete contacts, change fields, you can add tags, create relationships. You can do any number of actions that any user could do, really, but often driven off the back of one of these rules. So I wanted to, like, similar to the events area, the scheduled reminders area, kind of just give a few different examples. So, and these are usually taken from stuff we've seen clients do. But if you have a new activity added of a specific type, you could then add the contact who is involved in the activity to a group. You could have a specific event trigger to say, when we get 50 participants, send an email to the coordinator, which to act as an internal alert to kind of check for the status or basically the popularity of an event. Or one that we've definitely seen people do, if a payment is set to due, then send an email to the contact and let them know because their payment is now overdue. This is, I've probably talked a lot about a lot of different ways that you can apply this, and still only kind of scratch the surface of the amount of automation you can build in using the Civi Rules toolkit. So lastly, to kind of sum up what I've talked about today, I just wanted to kind of like take a step backwards and just point back to what each of these sort of core areas is for and does. The traditional mailings area is much more standard and is definitely simpler to work with within Civi, but is often relied upon because the templates that you build into it are the templates that you'd refer back to for things like automated mails and scheduled mails. And also the ability to use those HTML templates is quite heavily used by clients, as if you have existing templates that have been designed or worked on, you can just import those wholesale. Mosaico is much more driven by the sort of presentation element and by making it branded and sort of smart and really effective, so geared towards marketing and that kind of use cases, but also has the really easy to use drag and drop interface. So it's a great one to getting teams to adopt using Civi, and it makes it really fast to kind of get started with building out your mailing templates base and building out your kind of like comms program to either to your contacts, your members, or whatever the context is for your organization. And then lastly, the scheduled reminders and Civi Rules are both ways of like building in automation of, this can be internal or external facing to have repeated tasks or alerts to both to contacts or people in your organization, and also allows you to sort of link system processes together where they otherwise wouldn't be, connecting memberships to activities, to build-ins of custom flows like that suit your organization. And also, I think one point that is particularly useful is letting the rules set help you in automated data clear up. So being able to delete old contacts, things like that is really useful because, like as anyone I think who's operated a CRM for any length of time knows, you can end up with a lot of sort of clutter data. And so building a set of rules to help the system kind of keep on top of that for you can be really, really useful. So that's the end of my presentation. I realize I've probably gone through at a bit of a breakneck pace and into lots of different areas. So I think Alex, how much time have we got for Q&A? Because I'm more than happy to go.
5 minutes before the next talk. So yeah, I don't know, probably not
perfect.
Too much time.
Well, yeah, please let me know if there's anything.
There's lots of questions in the chat. I don't know, some of them might have been addressed or.
Oh, I haven't. Okay, I'll take a look at the chat now. But also I've got Steve with his hand up. So let's start with you and then I'll start going through the chat messages.
Hello, I typed this into chat, but since I can speak, can conditions be combined to trigger an action, a certain email to be sent out?
You could have one trigger, but multiple conditions. So the trigger is one because you need to kind of say, this is the trigger, but then you can put multiple conditions on that. So it's like, but only do this thing if these things are true. So that's how it would normally work. So it's one trigger and multiple conditions.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
And maybe it's worth also mentioning, Hamish, just for those who weren't necessarily following the chat, that Mosaico and Civi Rules are examples of CiviCRM extensions. So if you're not familiar with those, a bit like the fact that CiviCRM is a plugin extension or module for the three biggest open source content management systems, so Drupal, WordPress, and Joomla, CiviCRM also has its own plugin system called extensions. And so the initial functionality that Hamish is showing, the templates, is the functionality you get with Civi out the box if you just installed it. The other functionality, Mosaico and Civi Rules, you need to install these extensions, which can be as easy as going to the extensions listing and clicking add new, but might be a bit more complicated depending on how your hosting is set up.
Apologies. I think I skipped over that detail.
Cool. Mailings from Civi versus MailChimp, Jeanette. What would be some arguments for one or the other? I'll give a view on this and then put it open to the floor maybe. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we find with clients, small and large, is when data is in lots of different places and trying to keep it up to date. Now, let's not get away from the fact that MailChimp's an amazing platform. They've got lots of functionality. It's very pretty and easy to use. It has more features than Mosaico does. Whether you're using all of those features, though, I would question, because unless you're quite an advanced, comms team or marketing expert, you might not be really using all the things that MailChimp is offering. And so, having all your data in one place, but maybe slightly less features, might be better for you. And then you don't have to worry about, at a basic level, import and export of data and keeping two things in sync. Or there is a MailChimp integration for Civi, but it's quite complex to actually keep it aligned, just because MailChimp thinks of lists slightly differently to the way that Civi thinks of groups. So it does need a little bit of love and attention. So we generally recommend for clients to work with Mosaico and Civi. That's what we install by default. And I don't think we've actually got any clients who are using MailChimp anymore when they've moved to Civi.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the strength of the Mosaico to Civi integration is just really, really well established. So Jamie, you mentioned that there is a MailChimp extension, but the way that Mosaico connects is definitely makes life a lot easier to work with.
Yeah, so just to be clear, Mosaico is just a way of building your email, whereas MailChimp is a whole separate platform. So Mosaico is in Civi, so it just makes that building of the email a bit nicer and easier, as Hamish showed. And if you have a Civi installation without the Mosaico extension, we'd very much recommend that you install it, because it will make a big difference to all your users' lives if you're sending mailings. And that was a bit of work that we did with the core team a few years back.
I've got a hand up from Hugh as well.
Yes, thank you. Can you talk about Chasse? Are you familiar with Chasse for setting up email sequences?
So I'm not, but it looks like a nice extension. I don't know too much about it actually myself. I don't think we've got any clients in the wild using it, but it does look a nice extension for making series of emails, or like a drip campaign that you might want to send to people. So I recommend exploring it. Yeah,
I've been testing it, and right now my major frustration is that it seems that I'm only allowed to set up one email sequence, and I could imagine a single site wanting to have multiple email sequences, and wondering if the developers might be open to creating an entity that would allow that to happen. Maybe I just haven't figured out the secret sauce. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say it's Rich Lott. He's really responsive. If you message him on Mattermost, so that's chat.civicrm.org, I'm sure we'll get back to you. Or even if you posted a question on the GitLab for it as well, he's very helpful and responsive. So try and get some feedback. Yeah.
Cool. I think there's probably time for one question. I think there are several I can see in the chat here which follow the same theme around deliverability. With the last reference being, I think John mentioning that they use it's like a connection between Civi and MailJet. I guess to comment on that, I think one of the more standard ways we see Civi used is with like either a integration or a SMTP connection to a mailing tool that does the heavy lifting for delivering, but exactly as John said, keeps the core data in Civi so that you have one source of truth for your mailing data. Jamie, I don't know if you want to, I guess, add some detail to that.
Yeah, I think there's lots of so if you think about it, Civi can't send out an email without something to help it, in effect. And so there's a few ways to do that. You can install some very basic software on your server, which would allow you to do that if you're technical and you have access to your server to do that. If you're using some hosting, it might have that. Alternatively, a workaround where if you don't have that is to use something called an SMTP relay to do that as well. So this does get complicated quite quickly. It's probably the most complicated part of managing your own Civi if you wanted to do it. And there are some extensions that you can plug into Civi to allow you to use various different third-party services in order to send out those mailings. So they kind of replace the SMTP relay with an API. Sorry, I'm getting technical now, so this isn't going to help people who this is all gibberish to. In any case, and there's lots of different options there. So we use AWS SES, there's Mailgun, there's SendGrid, and there's lots of them. And there was a big debate a few years ago, and I'll try and dig out the blog post about what people use and what their experience is with it. It'd be great to get more people's experience, and maybe that would be a nice survey to do and to share that. And just different ways of doing it. What I would say is that it's quite technical. There are these technologies on the internet in order to ensure deliverability, DKIM, DMARC, SPF. They're also a little bit technical. It's a way of kind of saying this email came from us. It really did. I promise. Please don't put it in spam. And it might be the sort of thing that's worth, again, either working with an expert who's done it before, chatting with people on chat.civicrm.org, to try and get some help there. Or, if really it's a bit complicated for you using one of the hosted CiviCRM providers, let's say, we have Civi Plus, but there's, plenty of others as well to look at.